It began as Ellen DeGeneres' grand return, a talk show framed around forgiveness, image repair, and carefully chosen words. But when Jasmine Crockett stepped on stage, she didn't play along. She confronted Ellen about years of workplace abuse, mental health denial, and racial exclusion. Ellen expected a soft interview. What she got was a brutal cross-examination in front of the nation. Their clash turned a redemption story into a public reckoning that no PR team could control. But the moment that changed everything, what exactly did Jasmine say? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. For 2 long years, Ellen DeGeneres vanished from the spotlight. Her once beloved daytime throne now a scorched battlefield of controversy. The woman who once danced into millions of living rooms had retreated into silence, leaving behind a crater of broken trust and whispered confessions. Now, in a bold and highly publicized return, she unveiled her latest project. Redemption with Ellen, a glossy primetime talk show billed as a platform for healing, forgiveness, and moral reflection. But beneath the soft lighting and carefully curated apology tours, the press knew what this really was: a rebranding, a second act for someone whose first had ended in disgrace. Ellen's team needed credibility. They needed fire. They needed someone whose presence alone would ignite national conversation. So they reached for Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. The invitation was worded with strategic vagueness. We'd be honored to have you as our first guest to discuss public accountability and grace after hardship. Jasmine read it twice, then slid her phone across the table in silence. Her chief of staff, Malik, narrowed his eyes. They want you to humanize her, he said flatly. Jasmine didn't respond, but the air around her sharpened. She remembered 2020, not just the headlines, but the unseen faces behind them. The young black assistant producer who said she cried in the bathroom for months. The editor who was told not to mention their anxiety, or they'd be seen as unreliable. And then there was Ellen, smiling through it all, issuing blanket apologies while 3 scapegoats took the fall. Jasmine didn't need a chair on Ellen's show. She needed a reckoning. She declined. Politely, firmly. But 3 days later, a revised offer came, this time with a quote from Ellen herself. We want to hear from those who feel silenced by media systems. We want Jasmine to speak her truth. That phrasing shifted everything. Jasmine wasn't being asked to nod along. She was being handed the mic on national television. But this wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. She turned to Malik and said, "Tell them I'll do it, but make sure they understand. I'm not coming to talk. I'm coming to ask the questions their viewers have been screaming into silence for years." Then she leaned back, fire in her eyes. "And if she lies, I'll be ready." That night, long after the cameras were locked in and the stage lights prepped, Jasmine Crockett sat alone in her DC office, surrounded not by scripts, but by silence and scars she didn't own, yet couldn't ignore. The desk was buried in open browser tabs, BuzzFeed exposés, Variety timelines, Rolling Stone interviews with blurred-out faces and raw, anonymous confessions. Jasmine leaned forward, face lit only by the flickering blue of a laptop screen, her jaw clenched as phrases like systemic fear, unspoken retaliation, and her smile was a mask flooded every paragraph. The deeper she read, the clearer it became. Ellen hadn't just missed the signs, she had profited from their invisibility. Jasmine grabbed a yellow legal pad and began to write in bold, uncompromising strokes. Question 1. Why did no staffer ever see your apology until it aired? Question 2. How do you define kindness when silence protects abuse? Question 3. Who was promoted? Who was erased? She didn't write these for airtime. She wrote them like legal charges, deliberate, factual, impossible to dodge. Then out of nowhere, her phone buzzed. A direct message. No name, no pleasantries, just a sentence. I used to work for Ellen. I know what she really said. Jasmine froze. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She tapped. A file uploaded. Grainy, clearly shot from a control room monitor. It showed Ellen, mid-conversation with a producer, her face hard. Not the warm, telegenic host America adored, but someone colder, blunt, dismissive. And then she said it. If he needs therapy, maybe he shouldn't be working here. A cruel joke, tossed casually, off air but on brand for those who knew the truth. Jasmine hit pause. Her jaw clenched. Her heart raced. She replayed the clip. Not for confirmation, she already believed them, but to feel the full weight of it. The full weight of a woman who'd built an empire on empathy, weaponizing someone's mental health struggle for a laugh. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Same source. Please, if you care about justice, don't let her act her way out of this. Some of us still wake up afraid, still unemployed, still in therapy. Jasmine stared at the screen, eyes burning, not with tears but with clarity, the kind that comes only when the last mask has fallen. She closed the laptop slowly, stood up, and turned off the desk lamp. The room fell into darkness, except for one small light still shining behind her. The truth. And she whispered into it, steady and low. Tomorrow, I'm not going there to talk. I'm going there to break the silence. The next evening came with the weight of something historic, less like a taping, more like a trial. And when Jasmine Crockett stepped out of the car, the California air felt thick, not with heat, but with expectation. This wasn't just television. This was Judgment Day on a soundstage. The studio shimmered like a stage built for redemption. Every surface gleamed. Spotlights traced perfect halos around white armchairs that looked more like confession booths than furniture. The backdrop pulsed with soft, oceanic blues, calming, intentional, almost manipulative. Producers whispered in earpieces like generals on a battlefield. Stagehands moved with military precision. Every angle had been planned, every shadow eliminated. They weren't just building a set, they were building Ellen's second chance. Then, right on cue, she appeared. Ellen DeGeneres stepped into the light to the sound of warm, automatic applause. She smiled the way America remembered. Wide, easy, engineered to disarm. Her pale gray blazer was soft, safe, carefully non-threatening. The lighting framed her like a halo. For a moment, if you squinted, you could almost forget the articles, the investigations, the buried voices. You could almost believe this was just another comeback, another misunderstood celebrity trying to heal, but only if you weren't paying attention. She sat down, crossed her legs, leaned forward slightly, and delivered her line like it had been rehearsed 50 times. Because it had. Thank you for being here. I'm ready to face everything I've caused. There it was. Gentle, vulnerable, non-specific. The kind of sentence that passes as accountability when no one dares to follow up. The audience gave a soft murmur of approval, unsure whether to clap again or stay quiet. Ellen gave them the same smile she'd worn for 2 decades, only this time it looked like a costume. Then the second door opened. No music, no applause, no fanfare. Just the sound of footsteps, measured, steady, deliberate. Jasmine Crockett walked into the studio like someone walking into court, not a green room. Dressed in deep navy, with a blazer sharp enough to cut through pleasantries, she didn't look around for approval. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. The crowd didn't know what to do with her silence, so they stayed frozen. The difference was immediate, undeniable. Ellen had entered like a host. Jasmine entered like a verdict. She didn't sit. Not yet. She looked at Ellen, not through her, but into her. And for the first time all evening, Ellen blinked. Not because of the lights, because of the weight. Because Jasmine wasn't playing by the rules of daytime TV. She wasn't here to be pleasant. She was here to be precise. Jasmine took one step forward and spoke with the calm of someone who'd already decided not to flinch. Then let's not pretend, she said, voice low but cutting. A pause. Her eyes locked on Ellen's. Let's begin with the truth. And for the first time that night, the room didn't feel stage. It felt real. It felt dangerous. It felt alive. The silence after Jasmine's words wasn't just awkward. It was surgical. It cut through the lights, the set, the illusion. And then, with the calm precision of someone who had waited long enough, she began the dissection. Jasmine didn't raise her voice, but every word felt like it echoed through the bones of the room. She leaned forward, Not aggressively, but with the weight of truth that no stage cue could soften. Her tone was low, steady, but her eyes didn't blink. "Let me ask you something, Ellen," she said, her voice slicing through the artificial calm like a scalpel. "Why didn't you ever apologize to those people? Face to face, not on a segment, not with a camera crew and an Emmy-nominated sound team. I mean really apologize. One by one, off air, human to human. Why did you turn their trauma into your redemption arc?" She didn't flinch. Her words landed with intention, one after the other, like the sound of courtroom evidence being laid out on a cold, hard table. "You had their phone numbers, their names. You saw them cry in the halls, and then you saw them disappear. And still, the only apology they ever got was packaged between a monologue and a dance break." Ellen's face, normally a portrait of poise, twitched. Her lips parted just enough to inhale, as if she was preparing to speak. But no sound came. She looked like someone who'd walked onto the wrong set of her own show, and Jasmine saw it. She didn't hesitate. She shifted in her chair, just slightly forward, and asked the second question, with even more force, but no less control. "You said you didn't know what was going on behind the scenes. That's what you told the media. That's what you told America." A pause. "But Ellen, you weren't an intern. You weren't a guest. You were the executive producer, the host, the brand." Her voice sharpened. "So tell me, do you honestly expect people to believe that you didn't know the people who were being belittled, humiliated, fired for speaking up? Are you calling that ignorance? Or is that just what accountability looks like when it's too late?" The room felt frozen, like everyone inside was holding their breath without realizing it. The temperature hadn't changed, but somehow everything felt colder. Ellen's smile had vanished. Her posture was no longer relaxed. It was tense, guarded, like a boxer pressed to the ropes but refusing to swing. She reached for her water but didn't drink. Her hand trembled just enough for the studio cameras to catch. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She delivered the third question like a closing argument. Her tone didn't rise, but it deepened, carrying something older, heavier, like it wasn't just her voice speaking, but the echo of every name that had been left out of Ellen's version of the story. "How many black employees ever had real power on your set?" Jasmine asked. "Not interns, not assistants. I mean producers, writers, directors, the people who could say no to you. How many?" She stared at Ellen, unwavering. "And tell me, how many of them were still standing when the scandal hit? Because we looked. And from where I sit, it doesn't look like an oversight. It looks like a pattern." Ellen didn't speak. She couldn't. The silence that followed wasn't accidental. It was earned. The audience didn't clap. The cameras didn't pan. There was no laugh track, no soft piano swell to cushion the moment. Just the raw sound of a set cracking under the pressure of a truth too long avoided. For the first time on Redemption with Ellen, there was no control, no edit, just a woman who had danced past accountability for years, and another who walked in with nothing but the facts and made the whole room listen. The moment felt like a fuse being lit in slow motion. Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't even clear her throat. Her hand moved with purpose, deliberate and calm, as she reached inside the inner lining of her navy blazer. The studio lights reflected off a small matte black USB drive between her fingers. She didn't hold it up. She didn't announce it like a prop on a late-night bit. She simply placed it on the glass table between them with a soft click, like a judge lowering a gavel in a courtroom that had gone far too long without order. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It cut through the artificial stillness like a scalpel. "This drive contains footage from your post-production room," she said, her words measured like closing arguments. "Not public footage, not edits made for air. These were private internal tapes, sent to me by someone who worked in your building, wore your staff lanyard, and cried in your bathroom." Ellen sat perfectly still, hands folded, but the color in her cheeks began to shift. Just slightly. The audience leaned in unconsciously, as if pulled by gravity. Jasmine continued. "In one of these clips, you're overheard mocking an employee who was struggling with clinical depression. In another, you're seen giving direct instructions to remove mental health leave from HR logs." She paused. "Your exact words. Just get rid of it. We don't need that weak energy on set. A sharp, involuntary inhale swept through the studio, maybe from the audience, maybe from someone backstage. Ellen's eyes darted once, quickly, to the monitor's off camera, like a swimmer checking for a lifeboat. But there wasn't one. Not this time. She cleared her throat. I don't recall saying anything like that. Her voice was softer now, not defensive, yet, but searching, scrambling for a ledge in a collapsing narrative. It doesn't sound like me, but Jasmine was already turning toward the control booth. Roll the tape. And just like that, the room changed. The background dimmed. The screens lit up. There was no theme music, no title card, no cue for the audience to clap or laugh. The footage began raw and unfiltered, time-stamped, colorless, pulled from what looked like an editing bay camera. There were multiple figures, but only one voice was unmistakably clear. Ellen's. She was seated, hair pulled back, laughing as she spoke into a headset. Her tone was dry, sharp, without warmth. If he's that fragile, maybe this isn't the right job. Her voice crackled through the speakers, louder than any amplifier. I need people who show up, not excuses in therapy form. Gasps didn't come all at once. They came in waves. First a ripple, then a shiver. Audience members leaned forward, some with hands pressed to their mouths. Jasmine watched them, not for drama, but for recognition. Recognition of the damage that so many had once dismissed as rumor, exaggeration, or just part of the industry. But the footage wasn't done. In the next scene, Ellen sat with her production coordinator, eyes locked on a computer screen. Her voice had shifted, not sarcastic now, but cold, flat, like a CEO reviewing budget cuts. Just delete those medical leave forms, she said. I don't want to keep filing that crap. People need to either be here or not. A long silence followed, not in the video, on the stage. The silence in the studio was no longer polite or tentative. It was stunned. And then, from the speakers, came the most human sound in the room. A voice, soft, cracking, a testimonial from a former employee. Her words barely audible at first. She didn't name herself. She didn't need to. I was one of the ones who filed a health leave. A pause. I had a panic attack in the stairwell, and no one came to check on me. Her voice trembled, choked. We used to believe in her. We thought she was different. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, now I just want to be seen as human again. That broke something. Not in Jasmine, she had already broken, but in the air around them. The audience wasn't reacting like spectators anymore. Some sat forward stunned. A few sat back, visibly uncomfortable. One woman clutched her handbag so tightly it bent under her hands. Even the crew, trained professionals, stood frozen behind their cameras, unsure whether they were capturing history or undoing it. Ellen didn't move. Her hands, once folded neatly, had slipped apart and now rested awkwardly on the edge of her chair, fingers twitching ever so slightly. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but stopped. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't sound hollow beneath that footage. Nothing that wouldn't collapse under the truth they'd all just seen. Jasmine turned back to her, not gloating, not vengeful. Her eyes held the weight of everyone who had never made it to that stage. You say you want redemption, she said softly. Redemption isn't a stage, it's a mirror. And today, that mirror finally answered back. The crowd still didn't clap. They couldn't. Applause would have been dishonest. This wasn't triumph, it was exposure. And sometimes the truth, when it lands too late, is too heavy to celebrate. The screen behind them faded to black, but the silence remained. And in that silence, for the first time in her career, Ellen DeGeneres didn't have a punchline. She just had the weight of her own words, played back to her, in a country that was finally, quietly listening. The room didn't return to normal after the footage ended, because there was no normal left. The damage had been done. But outside that studio, the world was just beginning to erupt. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, the first tremors hit Twitter like aftershocks. A short clip, just 47 seconds of Jasmine placing the USB on the table, surfaced and went viral before the credits had even rolled. By the time Ellen's studio lights dimmed, Let Jasmine Speak was trending in over 36 cities, joined almost immediately by a far more damning companion. Ellen knew. The internet moved like it always did, fast, furious, and brutally unforgiving. But this time, it wasn't a celebrity scandal people laughed at. It was a reckoning. A thread from a former segment producer gained 600,000 retweets in under 2 hours. She wrote, "She said we were a family, but families don't hide panic attacks. Families don't erase medical leave. Jasmine said what we were too scared to." By morning, the numbers weren't just digital, they were real. Major brands, some of whom had stood by Ellen through earlier backlash, began issuing vague but deliberate statements. Target, CoverGirl, Starbucks. "We take these allegations seriously. We are evaluating our ongoing partnerships." Behind the scenes, legal teams scrambled. Marketing executives held emergency Zoom calls. Quietly, advertisers began withdrawing from the network's fall schedule. Internally, Warner Media leaked panic. Revenue projections were adjusted. Contracts reviewed. No one wanted to be the last brand seen smiling next to Ellen DeGeneres. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's name ricocheted across platforms like a meteor tearing through a carefully curated sky. She wasn't trending because of what she wore or how sharply she spoke. She was trending because, in one uninterrupted shot, she had done what countless petitions, articles, and inside voices couldn't. She broke the narrative. She shattered the stage that had protected Ellen for years. What began as a single confrontation had evolved into a digital insurgency. TikTokers dissected every second of the footage. Media analysts called it the moment the media stopped protecting itself. One Gen Z creator stitched a clip of Jasmine's final line. "Redemption isn't a stage, it's a mirror." Over footage of factory workers, nurses, and corporate emails about unpaid sick leave. It reached 9.3 million views in a day. But the weight of the moment wasn't just cultural, it was political. Within 24 hours, two House representatives, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar, posted side-by-side statements. Both featured the now famous image of Jasmine staring across the glass table at Ellen, USB in frame, truth suspended in the air like a loaded verdict. AOC wrote, "This is what courage looks like." Jasmine Crockett didn't just walk into power, she walked through it. She didn't ask for the mic, she took it, and America needed to hear what she said. Ilhan Omar followed moments later. "The most dangerous thing you can do to power is speak plainly in its face." Jasmine did that, and she did it for every woman who was ever silenced behind a smiling gatekeeper. Their words didn't come without cost. Right-wing commentators and cable news hosts launched into defense mode. Some accused Jasmine of ambushing Ellen. Others framed the confrontation as uncivil, disrespectful, or careerist. But the backlash, instead of slowing the momentum, only made it spread faster. Jasmine didn't respond to the attacks. She didn't tweet. She didn't give sound bites. She remained silent for 36 hours, letting the footage speak for her. That silence, that calculated refusal to engage in the typical media spin cycle, only made her more powerful. The public wasn't waiting for a follow-up. They were already rewriting the headlines themselves. A graphic began circulating with her face centered between the two hashtags. "Let Jasmine speak," in white. Ellen knew, in blood red. It wasn't just viral, it was visual indictment. And then came the flood. Over the next 72 hours, over 50 former employees from the Ellen DeGeneres show came forward in private messages to journalists via open letters or anonymously through whistleblower portals. Some spoke of harassment, some spoke of mental health suppression. One wrote, "I watched a girl get iced out for calling HR. She went from supervising 10 people to sharing a desk with the mailroom guy. She had a panic attack. No one helped. Jasmine stood up for her." The hashtag "Let Jasmine Speak" became more than a trend. It became a campaign, a call, a rallying cry for media accountability and racial equity in corporate power structures. Protest signs popped up in Los Angeles, New York, and D.C. bearing the phrase, held by students, activists, and workers who had never seen themselves reflected in a moment of mainstream confrontation before. But amidst the storm, Jasmine remained still. She refused TV interviews. She declined op-eds. And that silence, so rare in a media age that rewards overexposure, gave her even more gravity. Commentators began referring to her as the woman who burned the studio down without raising her voice. A quote from her hearing resurfaced. "I'm not here to trend. I'm here to testify." Even within her own party, voices rose, some in praise, others in panic. "She didn't ask permission," one Democratic strategist said on background. "She just walked in and told the truth on national TV. You can't bottle that. You can't control that." But while the political world debated, the cultural ground was shifting beneath their feet. For years, Ellen had been protected not by the truth, but by the illusion of truthfulness. Her smile, her "be kind" mantra, her celebrity allies. Jasmine Crockett didn't just challenge that illusion. She exposed it. The world didn't see a woman being attacked. It saw a woman being revealed. And Jasmine, calm, prepared, unapologetic, had held up the mirror. On the fifth day, a billboard went up in Times Square. It showed two images, one of Ellen, laughing on the old set in 2017, and another of Jasmine staring her down across the table in 2025. Across the middle, bold and clear, were the words, "Kindness isn't a slogan, it's accountability." And underneath, the hashtag, "Let Jasmine Speak." The show had ended, but not the story, not the wait, not the reckoning. And when Ellen turned to Jasmine backstage, voice low, hands trembling slightly, it was no longer the performer who spoke. It was the woman behind the curtain, stripped of applause, finally forced to face the silence she'd always choreographed away. They moved through the corridor like two shadows caught between worlds. Gone were the hot lights, the artificial cheer, the carefully edited moments built for broadcast. Here, behind the heavy door marked "Private," there were no producers, no cue cards, no studio audience waiting to laugh or cry on command. Just a small room with beige walls, two chairs, and the sound of a clock ticking too loudly in the corner. The door clicked shut behind them. For the first time all night, there was no one watching. And for Ellen, that was the most terrifying part. She stood for a moment, back straight, then sat down slowly, as if her body no longer trusted itself to move without scrutiny. Jasmine remained standing. Her arms were crossed, not in anger, in discipline, in control. She didn't come in here for closure. She came for clarity. Ellen spoke first, her voice hoarse and smaller than it had ever sounded under the lights. "I used to think I was one of the good ones." She looked down at her hands. "I thought that giving to charity, speaking out for animals, supporting a few causes, that made me decent." A long breath. "But I never listened. Not really. Not when it counted. I didn't hear the crying behind the doors. Or maybe I did. I just didn't want it to mess with the brand." Jasmine didn't move, didn't blink. She let the words settle, unfiltered, raw, without spin. This wasn't the Ellen who joked between segments. This was the Ellen who had looked away while others suffered in her shadow. Ellen looked up at her, eyes wet but not weeping. "I remember once, a girl from wardrobe sat outside my office for 2 hours. She was shaking, said she needed to talk. I told my assistant to reschedule her. I was too tired that day. She quit a week later. I never asked why." Jasmine finally stepped forward slowly and sat down across from her. Her voice, when it came, wasn't cruel. It was clean, sharp like a scalpel meant for truth, not punishment. "It's not enough to remember now." Ellen looked confused. "I'm not trying to excuse anything. I didn't know how far it all went." Jasmine held her gaze. "You didn't want to know." She leaned in slightly, her voice a level lower, more deliberate. "Because knowing would have meant choosing, between comfort and accountability, between their pain and your peace." Ellen looked away, shame blooming slow and visible across her face. Jasmine continued, not out of anger, but necessity. "I've heard their stories. I've read their emails. I've looked into their eyes. Some of them still can't find work. Some of them still pay out of pocket for therapy. You built a machine that made kindness a currency. But when your people broke under that weight, you cashed out and blamed the floor they fell on." A long silence settled between them. Ellen finally whispered, "What do I do now?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "You name them." Ellen blinked. "What?" "Each one," Jasmine said clearly. "You say their names on camera, not in an Instagram caption, not hidden behind vague apologies about the team or the culture. You name the woman who was denied leave when her brother died. You name the man who was fired after his panic attack. You name the black producers you never once brought to the executive table, and the ones you quietly let go after the scandal broke. Ellen's face drained of all color. But what if I don't remember them all? Jasmine leaned back, calm, cold, and steady. Then find someone who does, because they remember you. The clock ticked. A truck passed outside. The room felt like a courtroom caught between testimony and sentence. Ellen swallowed. Her voice broke slightly. I'm scared. Jasmine didn't flinch. So were they. A beat. Every day for years. They were scared of speaking, scared of losing their jobs, scared of losing themselves. You built something that turned fear into a silent job requirement. Ellen looked like she'd aged 5 years in 5 minutes. She didn't argue. She didn't defend. She just nodded slowly, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had dismissed for so long. Jasmine stood up, smoothing the crease in her blazer. Before walking to the door, she looked back one final time. Redemption doesn't come from sitting in silence after the cameras are off. Her voice was soft, but iron hard. It comes from standing in the light and saying the names of the people who made your empire possible, even when you tried to erase them. Then she opened the door. The hallway outside was quiet. No applause, no headlines. Just the quiet hum of justice setting in. Slow, steady, and unmistakably real. Behind her, Ellen sat motionless, her reflection faint in the dressing room mirror. For the first time in her career, the mirror didn't show her a brand. It showed her what she'd become, and what she still had to do. What happened behind that closed door had changed something in Ellen, but it wasn't enough. Jasmine knew that apologies spoken in silence didn't heal wounds cut in public. So she returned to the stage, this time, not alone. The studio was quieter this time, not somber, not hostile, just reverent. The lighting had changed subtly, softer, less artificial. The stage no longer belonged to forgiveness dressed as performance. It had become a place of testimony. There were no monologues, no opening jokes, no warm-up comic. Just Jasmine Crockett, seated center stage, her posture composed, eyes steady, voice calm. She spoke into the microphone like she was addressing a courtroom, not a studio. Last week, the world saw a version of truth that was long overdue. But I believe in more than confrontation. I believe in correction. Today, we're not telling Ellen's story. We're telling the stories that never made it to the camera. The audience didn't applaud. They nodded, leaned forward, held breath. Then the lights shifted slightly, and 3 chairs were brought to the front of the stage. Jasmine rose from her seat and walked over, not as a host, but as a facilitator of truth. One by one, the guests entered. No celebrity fanfare, no graphics, no titles, just names and pain. The first was a black man in his mid-40s, wearing a dark blazer and a pin on his lapel, shaped like a clock. Time, it seemed, had taken something from him, but it hadn't broken him. He sat down, adjusted the mic, and cleared his throat. My name is Marcus Hill. I used to be the logistics manager on The Ellen Show. 10 years, 10 hours a day, sometimes 14. He took a slow breath. I was fired after I reported that one of my team members had collapsed from exhaustion. They told me I was creating unnecessary waves. A week later, I was gone. A murmur rippled through the room. He looked out into the audience, then turned toward Jasmine. When I lost that job, I lost my house. I lost insurance. I lost the ability to look my kids in the eye and tell them this country protects the honest. His voice cracked, but he didn't cry. He sat taller. And today I'm here because of a woman who never once asked me to shrink. A woman who didn't know me, but still chose to speak up for me. He turned his head slightly, just slightly, toward the back of the stage. The camera followed. Ellen sat there, in shadow, not as a guest, not as a star, just as someone who used to hold the power. She didn't speak. Marcus didn't look for her approval. He just exhaled and said, "For years I told the truth and paid the price. Today I get to tell it again, this time without fear. The audience held their silence like a sacred object. Next came a woman in her 30s, Latina, sharp-eyed, shoulders tense. Her name was Elena Rivera, and she'd been an assistant producer. She held a folded piece of paper in her hands as she sat, not to read from, but to hold like armor. She unfolded it once, then didn't look down. I was asked to smile through everything, she began, through being passed over, through being told I was too passionate when I pitched stories, through being told not to bring up my mom's illness because it made people uncomfortable. She paused, her voice catching. When I requested family leave to care for her, they said I wasn't essential enough to justify it. I was 28. She died that same year. A ripple of grief moved through the room. Elena steadied herself. I haven't spoken about this on camera, ever. But I'm here now because someone with a bigger platform and a stronger will said, you don't need permission to speak. Jasmine gave us that, not with her fame, but with her refusal to flinch. Then, the third guest, a soft-spoken white man in his early 50s, glasses, nervous hands. His name was Brian Lutz. He didn't work on camera. He worked in post-production. He spoke slowly, carefully. I edited the highlight reels, the ones everyone laughed at, the bloopers, the dancing. He gave a hollow smile. I also edited out crying interns, audio complaints, cut footage from people asking for help in the background. He looked directly at the audience. We erased it all because we were told this show is about joy. But it wasn't joy for us. It was fear. Fear of being fired if you hesitated. Fear of being branded difficult if you hesitated. So we didn't hesitate. We buried it, and it buried us back. A long, aching silence followed. Brian nodded once quietly. I'm here now because Jasmine pulled the footage back into the light. She gave us names, gave us space, gave us something no one behind that stage ever did. Dignity. Then Jasmine returned to her seat. She didn't wrap it up with a bow. She didn't summarize their pain with a tweetable quote. She just looked at the audience and said, what you saw last week wasn't a gotcha moment. It was a mirror. These people deserve more than applause. They deserve acknowledgement, and they deserve it from the person who once erased them. The camera turned again. Ellen remained seated, head bowed, not in shame, at least not entirely, in recognition. And for the first time, she nodded, not as a host, as a listener. As the lights dimmed and the studio returned to stillness, no music played. No one clapped. And then, in that quiet tension, Ellen stood, not to defend, not to deflect, but to finally surrender the stage she once ruled. She rose like someone coming out of mourning, not for a person, but for an illusion. Her footsteps were soft, but each one felt final. The air was thick, not with anger or pity, but with gravity. She didn't carry notes. She didn't need a speech. She knew nothing she said would undo what had happened. But silence, too, could be a kind of dishonesty. When she reached the center of the stage, she didn't look at the audience first. She looked down at the floor where so many had stood before her, forgotten, silenced, erased. Then she looked up. This will be my final appearance on television, she began, her voice quieter than anyone expected. I'm not leaving because I was canceled. I'm leaving because, for the first time in my life, I know that being heard doesn't mean I've been right. A hushed ripple of breath moved through the crowd. Ellen blinked against the lights, those same lights that had once made her glow with invincibility. For decades, she continued, I convinced myself that generosity was enough. I donated. I danced. I said the right things on the right days. But I never sat still long enough to hear who I was failing. She swallowed hard. I failed to protect the people who made this show possible. I failed to challenge my comfort. I failed to ask myself why so many tears fell behind the scenes while I smiled in front of them. She hesitated. Her hands twitched slightly at her sides, instinctively searching for something to hold. There was nothing but her own reckoning. I thought I was the hero of this story, but I wasn't. That line landed like a confession carved into stone. It echoed in the room like the final click of a courtroom door. I won't ask for applause. I won't ask for forgiveness. I'm not owed either. What I owe, she said, voice strengthening, is the space I've taken. I'm going to step out of the spotlight, not out of shame, but out of responsibility, because sometimes, her voice cracked again, the kindest thing you can do is to shut up and listen. And with that, she stepped back, not into the wings, just behind the camera, out of frame, out of focus. All eyes turned to Jasmine. She had remained motionless throughout, watching, measuring. Not Ellen's words, but their weight. Someone off stage motioned for her, a cue to speak, to close the show, to give the moment its television perfect ending. But Jasmine wasn't here to give endings. She was here to speak truth. She stood, straightened her blazer, and walked, not toward Ellen, but directly to the camera. I've been thanked these last few days, she began, her tone cool and precise. But I need you all to understand something very clearly. She looked out into the crowd, then back into the lens. This is not about me. This has never been about me. She paced a step forward, grounding each word like a gavel on the studio floor. This is about the ones who went home shaking from humiliation and had to smile at their kids. The ones who spent years believing that abuse was the price of working somewhere famous. The ones who were made to feel invisible so others could feel important. She let the words breathe, then tightened her voice. It's about the people who were mocked for crying, who were told to toughen up or lighten up, depending on who was in the room. The ones who were called difficult when they said the truth out loud. The ones who lost jobs, health, and pieces of themselves to protect someone else's brand. Her next words were not loud, but they landed like thunder. They were erased. I came here to name them. The studio held its breath. You could hear it, feel it. No one was scrolling. No one was shifting in their seat. They were waiting, for once, for the quiet people to be seen. Jasmine didn't soften. I won't accept your gratitude because I didn't speak for you to feel better. I spoke so the silence couldn't lie anymore. She turned her head, only slightly, toward Ellen, who stood frozen at the edge of the set. If you want to know what real kindness looks like, Jasmine asked, it's when someone loses everything for telling the truth and still shows up anyway. She paused. Let that sit. Then gently she said, let this be the last time we mistake charm for character. With that, Jasmine stepped away from the camera, leaving behind a stage stripped of artifice, soaked in truth, and echoing with the voices it once tried to silence. The screen faded to black, not with music, but with names. A rolling list, hundreds of them, the ones who were never mentioned on air until now. The names faded, the lights never returned, and just when it seemed the world had shifted with her truth, Jasmine Crockett learned what history reserves for those who dare speak too loudly: consequences dressed as silence. Exactly 7 days later, Jasmine's phone stopped ringing, but not from lack of attention. It was deliberate. Studio after studio, talk show after talk show, suddenly found her too confrontational, too disruptive, too dangerous for daytime. Agents who had once bragged about knowing her began to change the subject when her name came up. The same producers who once chased her for exclusives now cited format changes and internal restructuring. She wasn't blacklisted. She was blanked out, quietly, efficiently, and without fingerprints. A friend from a major network texted her late one night, "They're calling you radioactive, even the progressive ones. They think you embarrass the system, not just Ellen." Jasmine didn't reply. She didn't have to. She knew. She had stared down the beast, and no beast forgives a mirror. But while the gatekeepers shut their doors, the public opened theirs. Within hours of airing, the full interview was uploaded online, not by the network, but by an independent journalist who had live-streamed the episode from the parking lot. It wasn't slick. It wasn't framed with headlines or commentary. Just the raw, uninterrupted video. By day 2, it hit 20 million views. By day 6, it overtook every trending topic on YouTube. By day 10, the count stood at 83 million and rising. Clips of Jasmine asking the unaskable flooded TikTok, captioned in 5 languages. Threads unpacking her rhetorical technique were pinned by law professors. A viral remix of her closing monologue over Hans Zimmer's Time soundtrack protest videos in 5 cities. People weren't just watching, they were remembering. One clip in particular, Jasmine's face lit only by the overhead rigging, her words laced with steel, began circulating with a simple title, "The Day Truth Didn't Blink." And somewhere in Los Angeles, in a quiet, cramped dormitory above a taqueria, a second-year media student named Maya Torres watched the full hour for the third time. She had grown up on Ellen's show. Her mother had once pointed to the screen and said, "You see? That's what success looks like, being loved by everyone." But now Maya saw the cost of that kind of love. She saw the lies it demanded, the silence it fed on, the bodies it left behind. And for the first time in her short life, she picked up a pen and wrote a letter. Not a tweet, not a post. A letter on real paper, with trembling hands. "Dear Ms. Crockett, you didn't just show me the truth. You showed me what it means to stand in it. You taught me that sometimes being good means being uncomfortable. Sometimes it means being hated, but it should never mean betraying yourself." She folded it carefully, sealed it, and taped it to the inside of her dorm closet door, where no one could see it yet. She wasn't ready to mail it. Not yet. But she was ready for something else, to stop apologizing for the questions she asked in class. Across the country, the ripple widened. In Chicago, a high school teacher printed out Jasmine's transcript and made it required reading for a civics unit on whistleblowers. In Atlanta, a local pastor cited her confrontation in a sermon titled, "The Gospel of Uncomfortable Truths." In a small town in Nebraska, a retired nurse gathered a group of former co-workers and said, "I think I was one of those people who laughed when others were crying. I think I need to change that." But Jasmine, she wasn't trending. She wasn't being booked. She wasn't basking in virality. She was alone. Her team had shrunk to one intern and a part-time assistant. Her inbox was flooded, but mostly with hate mail, legal threats, and 2 cease and desist letters from media firms demanding she cease unauthorized public distribution of trademarked content. Her name was a lightning rod. Her motives were dissected. One op-ed called her a performance arsonist addicted to outrage. Another warned, "There's a thin line between justice and vengeance. Crockett is dancing on it." She read none of them. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table at 2:14 a.m. Barefoot, her laptop open but idle, a cup of cold coffee half sipped, and stared at the city through her window. Not out of despair, out of clarity. This was never going to be applause. This was fire. And fire doesn't get thank yous. It gets used or feared. She looked over at a small stack of mail. One envelope stood out. No stamp, no return address, just handwriting. She picked it up, opened it, and unfolded the page. She read Maya's letter once, then again, then a third time. She didn't smile, but she whispered something just under her breath. "That's why." 10 days after the video's release, a panel of anchors debated the fallout on national television. "Has Jasmine Crockett gone too far?" one host asked, glancing at the camera with a smirk. But the other guest, an older journalist with gray in her temples and truth in her eyes, looked directly at the lens and said, "No, I think Jasmine Crockett went exactly far enough. The rest of us just haven't caught up yet." And somewhere in that moment, between the silence of the studios and the roar of 83 million clicks, a seed was planted, not for fame, for change. Because long after the hashtags fade and the news cycle resets and the next celebrity scandal lights up the screen, there will be people like Maya, writing letters, remembering the woman who didn't flinch. A week of broadcast silence did not muffle the roar in Jasmine's ears. It only redirected the noise inward, into a private echo chamber where doubt, resolve, and a relentless, almost surgical curiosity about justice argued for space. The human lesson at the charred heart of this saga begins with a brutal acknowledgement. Charm can launder cruelty until everyone forgets to check the stains. Power often hides in plain sight because it arrives as a joke, a giveaway, a feel-good dance that makes the studio audience cheer while backstage hallways accumulate broken voices. Jasmine's on-air confrontation tore that illusion open, revealing that cruelty wrapped in a smile is still cruelty, And the sooner we name it, the sooner it begins to lose its camouflage. Silence, she discovered, isn't an empty space. It's a transaction. Every unspoken objection is a down payment on someone else's misery. The longer we defer the debt, the more interest it accrues in anxiety, ulcers, therapy bills, and funerals postponed because medical leave was inconvenient for production. Courage, therefore, must be noisy before it is polite. It must enter the room the way thunder enters a valley, without waiting for local approval ratings, because comforting the powerful has never emancipated the powerless. Kindness, if it is real, cannot be scheduled for sweeps week. It cannot be choreographed between ad breaks. It lives in forgotten moments when no one tweets, no one films, no one posts. And that is exactly why Jasmine refused to collect applause. She understood that gratitude offered too early can fossilize into permission to quit halfway up the mountain. Being good will cost you. It will cost you invitations to the soft seats and the sweet deals. It will cost you the lazy safety of unanimous rooms. It will cost you the illusion that you can do the right thing and still be universally beloved. Yet the price of betraying yourself is steeper, because that invoice never stops arriving at 3 in the morning. Anger, when aimed at oppression, is not the opposite of grace. It is grace dressed for combat. Jasmine's voice shook not from lack of composure, but from the gravitational pull of decades of muffled voices clustering at her vocal cords, demanding to be released. If that vibration unsettled polite society, then politeness was overdue for demolition. Redemption, contrary to every glossy rebrand, is not a comeback tour. It is an exile you volunteer for, where you sit in the wilderness long enough for your ego to starve and your empathy to develop calluses. Ellen's only path forward now leads away from the lights. Anything less would turn remorse into just another segment. Legacy, in the end, is authored by the most forgettable witnesses. Dorm room freshmen writing letters at 2 a.m., retired nurses who stop laughing at cruel jokes, middle schoolers who see through a viral clip and decide never to stay silent in a locker room hazing. And when their time comes, they shape the culture in directions the ratings departments never predicted. But the lesson does not stop at indicting old sins. It carries an instruction manual for everyone still clocked in inside imperfect systems. First, audit your laughter. Ask whether the joke requires someone else's invisible tears to land. If so, you are participating in a theft of dignity disguised as entertainment. Second, memorize the floor plan of your privilege. Know where the fire exits are, so you can drag others through when the building of hypocrisy inevitably catches flame. Jasmine mapped hers, then kicked the door off its hinges in real time. Third, practice the subtle art of refusal. Refuse to retweet empty apologies. Refuse to confuse donations with restitution. Refuse to edit out the wobble in a survivor's voice because it kills the vibe. Fourth, develop a palate for discomfort. The truth is rarely served at a comfortable temperature. It scalds, it chills, it unsettles the gut. But cultivated discomfort is the only seasoning that keeps moral taste buds from going numb. Fifth, treat visibility like a loan from the voiceless. If the spotlight ever turns your way, remember you are accruing interest every second you forget the people who paid for the bulb. Sixth, redefine winning. Jasmine did not win a trophy. She detonated a narrative. Victory looked like job offers evaporating, ratings plummeting, and a wave of quiet survivors finally whisper shouting, "Me too," at their reflections. Seventh, take notes in the dark. Change rarely files its paperwork in daylight. It scribbles possibilities on backs of envelopes after midnight. And those scribbles, letters from Maya, classroom debates, sermons that sting, become blueprints for revolutions disguised as coursework. Eighth, remember that systems do not fear apologies. They fear organization. 83 million views are impressive, but 83 million voters, donors, whistleblowers, and boardroom question askers are history-bending. Every share button is a recruitment post for the next confrontation. Ninth, reserve space for the imperfect ally. Ellen's failure was colossal, but growth, if sincere, requires proximity to the rubble. Banishment without rehabilitation teaches bystanders that repentance is impossible. And if redemption is impossible, cowardice becomes rational. So build narrow bridges, guard them fiercely, but leave just enough room for the prodigal to limp back without a camera crew. 10th, protect your mirror at all costs. Empires pour millions into fog machines that blur reflections. Keep your glass clean, your lighting brutal, your willingness to start over intact. Because the day you stop recognizing yourself is the day you begin auditioning for a role you promised you'd never play. Finally, stitch these principles together with a thread as unglamorous as it is indestructible. Consistency. Speak when no one is trending, give credit when no one is filming, correct yourself when no one is clapping, and refuse the bargain of selective empathy that says some tears are content and others are noise. If the broadcast booths label you too intense, wear it like a medal. If advertisers pull their dollars, remember that the truth has always been crowdfunded by the stubborn hearts of ordinary people who pass notes in class and letters in dorms. Jasmine Crockett walked into a studio built on applause and left it covered in echoes. She showed the world that maps drawn by power can be redrafted if one person refuses to erase the marginalized to fit the frame. That is the human lesson. Real change moves at the speed of courage, and courage is nothing more than the daily decision to be allergic to complicity. So the next time silence offers you a discount on comfort, remember Jasmine, remember Maya, remember 83 million eyes watching a woman refuse to blink. Then ask yourself if you are willing to pay the full price of being fully, ferociously human. The story's embers are still hot beneath your feet, and if you listen closely, you can hear them ticking like buried mines, daring you to step forward and finish what Jasmine began. Stand up now, literally rise from whatever chair, couch, subway seat, or fluorescent-lit cubicle you're inhabiting, and feel the weight of your own body taking back gravity, because this moment is not a vignette for casual consumption, but a live fuse wired straight to every system that trades human dignity for ratings, profits, or a comfortable shrug. And the first act of rebellion is refusing to remain seated while that fuse burns beneath someone else's skin. Open a browser and type the name of a worker rights organization in your city, sign their petition, donate $5, $10, whatever the cost of silence has been for you. Then share the link not with a lazy repost, but with a personal note that says, "I'm done applauding politely while people bleed off screen," because algorithms may bury generic outrage, but they cannot mute a confession written in your own fingerprints. Pick up your phone, scroll to the bottom of your contacts, and text the quietest person you know at work. Yes, the intern who stacks coffee orders, the night janitor who hums alone down the hallway, the volunteer who never speaks in meetings, and ask them how the place really feels after the lights go off. Then close your mouth and listen without fixing, pivoting, or translating their pain into a networking opportunity. Because solidarity starts with creating a vault where the overlooked can pour their unedited truth. And once that vault is full, you carry it, brick by brick, into the next staff meeting and refuse to let the minutes conclude until their words are inscribed in the official record. If you belong to a house of worship, a book club, a fantasy sports chat, any circle that gathers humans out of habit, hijack the next agenda and play a 5-minute clip of Jasmine's interrogation. Yes, the part where Ellen tries to swallow the truth and chokes on silence. Then ask the room who in your shared sphere has been paying the hidden tax of keeping the vibe positive. Because scenes of televised courage are useless if they die on the screen. So resurrect that courage in every sanctuary, basement, and bar, and dare your friends to name one concrete policy they will change in their own domain before the week is out. Email your local school board and demand that media literacy curricula include not just the heroic narratives of journalistic triumph, but the darker chapters where laughter was weaponized against the powerless. And cite the 83 million view case study as proof that teenagers can deconstruct gatekeeping if we supply the lenses. Attach a lesson plan if you have 5 minutes, because bureaucracy stalls on vagueness, but panics when handed specifics, and every classroom that watches Jasmine's composure under fire becomes a seedbed of future whistleblowers who will not stop the recording when authority clears its throat. Turn your social media feed into a ledger of accountability. Whenever a brand tweets about kindness, pull their 10K labor disclosures and quote employee churn rates in the replies. Link watchdog investigations beneath their pastel PR posters, and tag consumer rights groups until companies realize that every hashtag they coin can be flipped into a subpoena for receipts. Because the marketplace only fears one thing more than boycotts: receipts that trend. If you work anywhere with an HR portal, file a formal request asking how mental health leave is logged, who signs off, and what percentage of requests are denied. Then screenshot the unanswered ticket and schedule a recurring calendar reminder every 30 days until data surfaces, because persistence is activist oxygen and corporations count on your fatigue. If the answers arrive toothless, forward them to a journalist, a union organizer, or the world, because transparency withheld is complicity extended, and the clock is already running on the next invisible breakdown in a stairwell like the one Jasmine exposed. Commit right now to a 6-month plan of consuming one story a week from people you normally scroll past: frontline domestic workers, asylum seekers, disabled creators explaining the hidden fees of ableism, and keep a journal of how each testimony recalibrates your reflexes. Because empathy without documentation evaporates into sentiment, whereas empathy recorded becomes a map you can hand to the next traveler stumbling through the tunnel of "I never knew," and those maps, multiplied, harden into roads that lawmakers are eventually forced to pave. When election season swells with slogans about civility, remember Jasmine's trembling cup of truth and ask each candidate in your district to define kindness without using the words charity, civility, or smile. If they cannot, record the silence and post the clip. For silence, once published, is louder than any stump speech, and no official deserves your vote if they cannot differentiate between a photo op donation and the slow grind of structural repair. Finally, pledge, out loud, maybe awkwardly, to break your personal algorithm. Swap 1 hour of doom scrolling for calling a state representative. Replace one comfort show binge with volunteering at a worker center hotline. Exchange one self-congratulatory meme for printing a flyer that lists mental health resources and pinning it to the break room corkboard at 7 a.m. before anyone can peel it down. Because revolutions are not thunderclaps born in capitals. They are barn fires started in the most ordinary fields when one match refuses to be blown out. And if, by nightfall, that still feels small, remember Maya Torres taping her letter inside a dorm closet, an act unseen, unretweeted, yet potent enough to fracture the sound barrier between resignation and resolve. Then imagine 50,000 Mayas reading the same call, taping their own letters, and realizing their closets are temporary storage for the megaphones they are destined to build. Your single step adds flooring to their stage, so move now while the coals are hot and let the world feel the shudder of a million tiny actions, converging into the one headline every abuser dreads: the silence is overbooked. We suggest you speak now. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.